What is the biggest culture shock you've ever experienced? Traveling to Sudan as a Westerner when I was a teen. The movies and TV don't prepare you for how different it is down there. It's crazy. The way everyone eats with their hands always, the way garbage was thrown in the streets in bags and no one cared, the way everyone lined up to buy ice cream at one singular place when it got super hot, the way everyone looked at you for being a blonde woman, etc. Not to knock on it at all, but it was just culturally shocking. The mum of the family I was staying with got married off when she was 16. Just like that. No say in the matter. They had to go physically pay for electricity at this shop every few days and it would black out regularly. No air condition then or working fridge. I had a medical emergency, and my local small-town hospital couldn't handle it, so they sent me to the big inner-city hospital for surgery. I came out of surgery and was brought to my hospital room to recuperate. I noticed that I had a roommate. Being polite and kind, I asked my roommate why he was in the hospital. He turned his heavily tattooed face toward me, smiled at me showing his fancy gold teeth, and said, "Triple gunshot victim, drug deal gone bad. You gotta remember, I came from a small quiet suburban town." So when I heard his answer I screamed inside, "I don't belong here." I kept thinking, what if the people who tried to kill him came to the hospital to finish him off? If it's not too personal, what city was this? Philadelphia. I'm not very well traveled. Almost all my international travel has been in the US. I've been 8.5 states. But my culture shock has been every time I return to Canada. I'm always shocked at how poor customer service is in Canada compared to the US. The difference in customer service quality at McDonald's in the two countries is massive. The Canadian locations treat you like a chore that they want to get rid of, while the American ones, no matter what state I've been in, are so much friendlier. Last time I was in Seattle, I really was impressed with the customer service at T-Mobile Park. I have never been to a sporting venue in Canada where the staff treat you with even basic courtesy. I also find sit-down restaurants and even Walmart to be much better in the US. I can't get over how standoffish Canadians are compared to Americans. We Canadians have a stereotype of being polite, but I find Americans way more polite. It's a form of reverse culture shock. The streets in cities here in the United States are very well constructed and there's a light in almost every main street. Shush, this is Reddit. Everything about the US is horrible. We are all just a bunch of fat asses with no health insurance shootings black people in our well-constructed and lit streets. Nah man, Reddit always talks about how cheap consumer good in America compared to the rest of the world. I was visiting a temple in rural India. When I got the main sanctum area, I spoke to the man who performs the rituals. I asked him how long he had been there, then the priest proceeds to take out a family tree and says, "Since the 13th century. It caught me really off guard and made me realize how short-term-minded I am. How disconnected I am from my ancestors, and how I prize my individuality so highly." Rural Uganda. People so poor that they couldn't afford shoes but were wearing donated Man United shirts. People walking round basically naked with no electricity, no infrastructure for sanitation, just living off of their farmland and any donations. Everyone also stopped what they were doing to stare at me because I am white. Was a bit unnerving, but most people were friendly. Sharpens his machete. Visiting Japan and basically there being a bidet almost everywhere I went. Just made me feel clean afterwards. Now I want one on my toilet. Buy one cheap on Amazon. Going to Manhattan and seeing obviously buildings and PPL, but all the soldiers with guns at airport and police officers with the bigger kind of guns. My wife felt nervous. I didn't feel nervous cause police and stuff are handling, so not worried, but I just hardly ever see guns, so just seeing so many I noticed it. My very rural Mexican aunt, at least back in the 80s, used to go bonkers over the fact that in American grocery stores we have an entire aisle dedicated to food for dogs and cats. She thought that was the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. Halloween blew her mind too. She thought it was a satanic thing where you dress up like devils and beg for food. People wearing shoes in their house. Like why? Not in me, but a friend went to Egypt. The nomads over there have a long nail on the pinky finger. It's to scrape away the sand from after they shit. Yep, it's shit. Then rub with sand and scrape away with fingernail. I live in Istanbul and I went to Spain for a week. Didn't know pedestrians actually cared about traffic lights. Not sure if it is a culture shock, but some Norwegians came to our school via Erasmus project and student exchange project in EU. One of them was staying at some kid's house and kid's mum prepared some sandwiches for them. Guy opened his bag, said, "Well, there is no space in my bag," and started a soccer game with it. We were all shook. How incredibly sweet and kind people are, and the more you travel you will really begin to question your own morals and values. In Arabia I learned the value of making a guest feel like a king. In Korea I learned that everyone will help you out and are already your friend before you even get to know them. But the biggest shock was Singapore. They are. The sense of collectivism is so strong that they watch over your belongings for you, and at food stalls, they want to make sure you are 10,000% satisfied. One last thing, Dubai. 90% of the population is foreign. Going around and seeing only Europeans and North Americans was so confusing. There just weren't any locals, especially in the shopping centers. Workers were Indian or Filipino, and the rest were in A and the EU. Oh, and having such diversity, right-wing politicians may shit like crime and violence is what immigrants bring with them. Well, actually, the most diverse countries or places like Dubai are incredibly safe. More so than developed countries. So here is another common tip that many people don't understand. Immigrants are going to act the way that they are welcomed and treated and integrated. Treat people like garbage, abuse them, exploit them, make them work overtime with no pay, and just watch as they are driven against their will into a life of crime. But if you integrate, you can attract some of the best talent on offer for the entire world. Racist politicians. Ha ha ha. Inciting hatred and violence against other groups of people is illegal in Singapore. So why can't we learn from them and act such a law? Punishment is 10 years in prison for disturbing the harmony of society, and make sure that the politicians are uniting society, not fracturing it. Even when the law is there, we do nothing. A racist Dutch politician, Geert Wilders, was out on trial and found guilty of violating Dutch anti-hate speech law. So the court found him guilty. His sentencing, absolutely nothing. He was guilty and saw no jail time or rehabilitation therapy. What's the point of having laws and judges that in even the worst cases don't enforce the law? Really, what a shame. Our systems need massive reforms, but until we get someone like Willy Brandt or Lula da Silva, hope he wins the next elections, and yes, Sanders and Warren too, things will just rot from the inside. I also don't care about left or right. I like Angela Merkel and she's on the right just as much as I liked Fidel Castro. It's time to unite. It doesn't matter where you stand politically. Progress, peace, prosperity, egalitarianism, it must prevail. People of the left, people of the right, we must unite. I grew up in Melbourne, Australia, which is basically a big cultural melting pot that likes street. I now live in Gippsland, which is a regional, rural area near Melbourne, and same situation. Lots of food. I went to France about 15 years ago and it blew my mind that in most areas I could only get French food. It honestly never occurred to me before then that such variety was not the norm. In junior high I made friends with a Lebanese girl whose family had come over recently. I thought nothing of it because whatever, it's just my friend, who cares. She invited me over for dinner one night though, and I was really shocked that there was no table. Just a mat and cushions around it. And it felt like her dad was staring daggers at me the whole meal. Not sexually, just more like he hated me, but maybe that was in my head cause he didn't say or do anything. I've only ever eaten dinner in a Lebanese family's home twice, and each meal was among the best I ever had. Course after course after course, and if I even thought about helping cleaning, I was basically shouted at until I sat back down. Lovely people in my experience, and nothing beats Ramadan dinner. Oh man, yeah, the food was freaking great. I was young and had never seen a situation where you eat without a table, so it was strange to me. But hell yeah. The food I ate was amazing. Everything was great. My friend's dad staring me down was the only bad thing. I'm a woman myself, I have no idea why he seemed to hate me. Maybe cause I'm white. How horny and unpreoccupied some people can be around the Caribbean. I went to a grand old cinema in Jaipur in India and watched a film entirely in Hindi. Wish I knew what it was called. I didn't understand the dialogue, but I got the gist of the plot. A guy is arranged to be married to a quiet, uninteresting girl, but before they get married, he meets a free-spirited manic pixie dream girl who brings him on wild adventures. The shock was the ending, where he ends up choosing to get married to the original girl and everyone ends up happy. The audience loved it and all cheered, but I was baffled. It went against every expectation of how these sorts of movies go.